Hey guys, hope y'all are doing well. In this video, we're going to be talking about the upcoming Canon 90D or whatever its name ends up being. I'm really excited about this because there's a lot of layers to it, like an onion, so let's peel it back, find out what it's going to be like. The thing that we got to start, the 0th layer, I wanted the 0th layer to be something else, but this has got to be what the 0th layer is. 0th layer here, that crunchy bit on the outside of the onion, won't make you cry like the innards will, is what does the 90D, or whatever its name is going to be, have to be? For Canon needs something that's a little bit more future-proof, that's a little bit bomb-proof, right? That price bracket and that value offering has been Canon's for a long time. So Canon's noticed. What Canon has to decide now is, are we going to continue with this formula that has allowed us to stay #1 in the camera market from a sales perspective, both dollars and units, as well as lenses and lens attachment? Or are they going to say, we really need to invest in our 90D, in our next couple of cameras? In my opinion, they're going to say the latter, right? They're going to say, we need to invigorate our user base, and we're going to do that with the 90D. Well, we got to expect the next question to be, the first layer that I wanted to be the 0th, but is now the first, is it a DSLR or is it a mirrorless camera? Hey there, I'd love to chat with you on a personal note really quick. Something I'm really excited about, actually. I have been really wondering if I could mount APS-C lenses onto my new A7 III and get good video quality out of it. That's actually what I've done right now. I've put my Sigma 30 f1.4 on my A7 III, and I'm really curious to hear what you think about the video quality down in the comments. I'd really appreciate it as well if you could smash that like button. It's been a really long time since I've had like over 75 likes. If I could manage that, I would really appreciate it of you. Thank you very much, and I'm really interested in your opinions on what has come and what will come in this video. Well, we got to expect the next question to be, the first layer that I wanted to be the 0th, but is now the first, is it a DSLR or is it a mirrorless camera? And when you think about it, most of the hardware is the same, right? The sensor, the processor from the 80D has spread all the way through Canon's mirrorless cameras. So we know that you can just port directly that hardware. I think what we need to see is new hardware, regardless of whether or not it's a DSLR or a mirrorless camera. If you'll take a minute and look with me at, some examples of the EFM with autofocus. These are only filtered by autofocus lenses. If you look at these autofocus lenses that are for EFM, what you're seeing is zero engagement by third parties except for Tamron, and they have one lens out. Tamron, which is nearly 12% owned by Sony, has put one lens out for Canon EF mount. It makes a lot of sense. They have an 18-200 for some other mirrorless lens mounts in APS-C, but you also got to think, okay, wait a minute. No one else has bought into this. No other third parties have bought into this. By this point, you should be expecting that other third parties would buy into it, especially like Sigma, who's, their meat and potatoes for a while has been art series lenses for Canon. Not so much Nikon because the user base isn't there, just being realistic, not trying to put a value statement on anything. We're not seeing engagement by third-party manufacturers. So from that perspective, it makes perfect sense to go DSLR with the 90D. But from the other perspective, DSLR sales are not really improving. Canon's ability to build profit into that price is, but what we're seeing is a huge growth of mirrorless in the mirrorless segment, right? So what Canon probably will end up doing is investing in EFM lenses and pushing the 90D in the direction of mirrorless. It might still be a DSLR, but then they might try to port that technology very quickly into mirrorless cameras. So, and again, with the way that Canon designs their system, their product map, tree, whatever it is, that hardware, sensor, processor, buffer, cache, the whole 9 yards, will end up moving over from DSLR to mirrorless and vice versa depending on which comes first, right? This is a chicken or the egg kind of conversation. So when we take a minute and we look at what the M50 is, it's very small. I don't know if y'all have held one in your hands. I have, and it's tiny. It's itsy bitsy teeny weeny. And what that is saying to me is that that's what Canon has identified as key for that segment. The 90D, the 80D, these prosumer cameras need to be a bit bigger than that. They need to be closer to an A7 Alpha 6300 size, right? That's going to probably push them back towards DSLR. And when we look at those DSLR lenses that are on the table between Tamron, Sigma, and Canon, both for full frame and APS-C, these are kind of the likeliest choices that I felt APS-C users would kind of dive into. We're seeing a whole lot of lenses with a value proposition that's a bit questionable. I built out, you know, a really long formula in Excel to help me not have to. I probably spent more time writing the formula than I did actually if I would have just gauged it by myself. But a lot of these lenses are not very high value proposition lenses. What we need to see from our third-party manufacturers is more high value proposition lenses in that Canon EF mount. That's not going to happen at a very quick rate because the person who's shooting an 80 or 90D probably isn't also buying into the highest end lenses in the first place. And so that value proposition has to be tempered by that cost to the end consumer has to be tempered by what will they actually be willing to purchase in terms of total dollar volume, right? So when we're thinking about DSLR lenses, there are more of them and there are more decent enough value proposition lenses to really, you know, slake the thirst of a user. So it looks like what we're seeing out of Canon is, to recap, we need to put more effort into the 90D than we've put in recently. It's got to be a DSLR. We're not ready to make that transition fully yet. And now when we think about things like body design and handling, a lot of things come into place. You can think about the 80D for a minute. You got that great looking front picture of it. You got on the sides, you have a card slot on the right side, and on the left side, you have all of that I/O. From there, I think we got to think about the specs, right? The specs and the features. This is what's going to drive users to this camera. This is what's going to drive the market back in Canon's favor, potentially even away from mirrorless, if they can get it right, if they can get this formula right. In order to future-proof the 90D, Canon's going to have to drop in 4K 30. They already have picture profiles to an extent. I think it would be nice if they could expand those. I think we got to see DPAF in 4K. We got to see at least 1080p 120, if not 2.7K 120. Because if they just come out with, you know, an equivalent to the 6300 and charge more for it, then they're not going to get unit sales like they were hoping they would. I think we also got to kind of hope for, you know, an HLG profile. The HLG in particular was brought about by the NHK in Japan and the BBC in the UK, and HLG. Now Sony's using the HLG as well as a couple other manufacturers, and I don't know if it's an open standard, but it kind of feels a little bit like an open standard, right? Kind of like a ProRes. Not that ProRes is actually free, but you get the point. So I've covered a whole bunch of video stuff. I think video is going to be one of the key drivers for value proposition in Canon's cameras going forward, just like it has been in Sony's cameras, in Panasonic's cameras, in Fuji's cameras. Look at the XH1, where they really invested in those video functionalities and features. And, you know, Olympus also doing very well with video. Those video features really bring the package together, and they really raise the level of that value proposition. So on the still side, you know, you got to expect a reasonable FPS rate. I don't think they're going to drop in 10 FPS mechanical, but what they could do is drop in 10 or 12 FPS electronic shutter. And that would be awesome. And with DPAF, they could afford to have that also be with autofocus. So they could really knock the ball out of the park by having a hybrid shutter system that they really should have been doing already in the first place, and managed to get both electronic and physical shutter implementation on a camera. They could, of course, for a mirrorless, they could just like take the mirror out of the camera and have the AF system be entirely dependent on DPAF. And that would not be a struggle bus whatsoever. I think that could make a whole lot of sense for them to do. In terms of megapixels, it doesn't really make sense to me to go greater than or less than 24 megapixels. 24 megapixels is a great size. If they could really improve ISO performance though, that would be killer. If they could improve dynamic range, that would be killer. One of the ways they could improve dynamic range would actually be to put more pixels in, which would also help ISO performance. But if they could do something like, you know, a BSI unit or something along those lines where they could really up the game by greater than a stop, you know, that would be killer. I think that whole suite between the stills, the video, FPS, dynamic range, that whole 9 yards, 4K, DPAF, high frame rate options, bring those together with a camera that has objectively a really good base of lens options, maybe not all good lenses, but good options. And you layer on top of that a user base that kind of trusts Canon. You layer on top of that a form factor that's familiar to just about everybody that's ever shot, because who hasn't touched a DSLR that is also touching a camera right now? And I think you really have a winning combination for Canon. I really hope that this is kind of what they execute against, because I think it could make a really big difference for their unit sales, for their volume of dollars that they're bringing in, and for kind of pushing back against companies like Sony, Panasonic, Olympus, and Fuji that have really taken off lately by providing a very high value proposition. That 90D really needs to come in under the 80D if that's going to be its feature set though. We have the Alpha 6300, whose feature set I've just about entirely described, coming in at closer to $800 now than $1,100, which the 80D is currently at. So you gotta match the dollars and the donuts, right? You can't be asking too much for what you're offering, especially if form factor is going to be in play. And then I think that Canon also needs to invest in those EFM lenses, because if they're going to start pushing that hardware into their mirrorless cameras, they need to have lenses that can really take advantage of all that capability. My name is Joshua Koerner. I've been super excited to bring this content to you. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention. Don't hesitate to smash that like button, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and comment. I'd love to hear your impression and your opinion on what I've brought to the table. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next one.